So recently I've been asked quite a lot to make an Elemental Flurry Shaman guide, and I thought, yeah, why not? I've played it quite a lot. I had a bit of a hand in getting a lot of other people who have been watching my channel into that type of build, so I'm thinking, yeah, why shouldn't I make a guide on it? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a quick guide, just like we did with our Tank Shaman, and that one went so well, genuinely. So, yeah, this should be my quick guide to Elemental Flurry, Shaman, and Classic WoW. Hope you enjoy. Let's go. So here's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to go over why you should play it, the build options, the playstyles for the build options, and then we'll go over some pros and cons of each. So first of all, why should you play Elemental Flurry? Well, I think it's no surprise that Elemental Flurry is not really the most refined of the multiple different builds you can do as a Shaman. The reason behind this is you do not get the hit talent in the restoration tree by going with this build, and you don't go for nature swiftness obviously with this build. So a lot of people would say, what's the point of this if you need the hit for both PvE and PvP just to cap out, and if nature swiftness is so good? Well, the point of it is, it's, number one, going to give you a unique playstyle. Number two, it is a true hybrid. So again, it goes back to that playstyle that it really does feel good to play. So I guess that's a 1 and a 2. So we'll do a new 2. The new 2 is that it does a lot of damage, okay? It really does do a shit ton of damage. You are a melee spell slinger, okay? And like I said, a hybrid. But taking things like Elemental Mastery and, depending on your build, things like Lightning Mastery, really make it to where you can be a caster, right? And also not be a caster, right? You can be melee at times as well. If you run out of mana, you're not a sitting goose like some caster type of classes. But overall, it gives you flexibility, and that's not something to throw away. So what are your build options for this? The first build option I want to show you guys is the more traditional build option. This one's going to go, again, 31 into Elemental, and then the remaining 20 into Enhancement. And the key thing about this build is that it takes Lightning Mastery and Lightning Reach. The really interesting thing about this build is that really it truly is just an Elemental Shaman that can go into melee, right? And that's very interesting when you think about the play style. You can sit in the back if you want, and you can spam Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning, but you can also get in the thick of it and use your two-handed axe or mace with Wind Fury or Frostbrand weapon, depending on opponent, and really dish out some pretty significant damage. I mean, specifically to Clothies, but nonetheless. Now, the other build is the more melee-focused build. Now, this one, again, it is still 31 Elemental and 20 Enhancement, but this one is going to skip Lightning Mastery, skip Lightning Reach, and go for Elemental Devastation plus Reverberation. Now, this makes you very shock-centric, and it's going to play very similar to how Enhancement Shamans play in PvP anyway. You're going to be auto-attacking a lot and throwing out shocks a lot, and your main damage combo is Elemental Mastery, Chain Lightning into a shock. Due to how spell batching works, you will get a crit on both spells when you do that, which is very, very good. And that's your same big combo with the other talent build as well, except with this build, your Chain Lightning is 1 second slower, so this is something you really need to guarantee you can get off. It's not something you just do incredibly fast at all times, right? And with this build, you're less likely to want to use Lightning Bolts basically ever. So, I mean, this can be made different. I mean, 3-second cast times on Lightning Bolt isn't terrible. 2.5 seconds on Chain Lightning isn't really that bad. But the issue is that it's just not very efficient for PvP because you can get interrupted. But these are the two main builds. Now, in terms of playstyle, clearly the playstyle is going to depend entirely on your opinion on your build and your gear. So the main thing I need to go over here is gear options. So there are two different ways you can gear your character, and as you can see behind you, I have collected quite a lot of different pieces of gear that should give you a pretty decent idea of how you can do it. To put it in a nutshell, one of your builds is going to be building like your traditional Enhancement Shaman, except you're going to be playing this melee Enhancement Shaman focus build with a spell twist, and of course the other way that you can do it is full elemental gear, in which case you will be using melee as your minor, and the best weapons you can really go for tend to be staves, Finkel's Lava Dredger, just anything really that is a big damage two-handed weapon will do. But if you can get intellect on it, that's really going to go a long way towards making you a lot stronger. And honestly, there are some staves that can be used that have high base damage and high DPS, but are never used for such a thing because shamans don't typically auto attack with them. So you'll have to really find what's best for you in that regard. Stat values are going to be the same. If you're going to go with the melee gear set and that version of Elemental Flurry, well, then you're going to want the same type of pre-raid biz that an Elemental Shaman, or an Enhancement Shaman rather, would want. And if you're going to go with the more elemental approach, you're going to want to go with that gear set. Now, yes, there might be some merit to mixing the gear sets. I don't really know what to do for that, though. The issue is, I'm pretty sure it doesn't really add anything. It doesn't really make you that much stronger to mix the gear sets, but it could possibly make you weaker. So I haven't really figured out the best way to do it. The issue for PvE is that you clearly can't hit cap on both spells and on your melee attacks, and even though that doesn't really matter that much in the long term, it matters enough to not really be super worth it. Now in PvP, if you go with this hybrid version of statting yourself, the biggest issue that you're going to have is that you are not going to really hit that hard with melee and still not really hit hard with spells, so it's kind of like both of them are subpar, as opposed to at least one of the two sides being exceptional and the other one just being better than it would have been if you didn't do this in the first place. So for example, if you go with the melee build and you take things like Elemental Devastation, Reverberation, Elemental Mastery, well, suddenly, Maelstrom Weapon wasn't that good of a spell in the first place. It's not like it really made a difference in your overall DPS. So, it doesn't really matter that you don't have Maelstrom Weapon. You're still going to hit really freaking hard with your weapon. Except now you can chain in really, really big crits from your shocks. You can guarantee the crits from your shocks, right? You can also double dip with the spell batching on Chain Lightning and Earth Shock, and it auto crits, right, for like 2k plus damage. It just gives you more in your arsenal, and that's very important to keep in mind. Again, flexibility. So, yeah, it depends entirely on the gear set, but the reason I haven't done this before is because I don't really feel like the gear set is unique. What we're doing is giving you flexibility with your character. This is very, very good for people who don't really want to play enhancement, in terms of the traditional way, which is just you're a walking stat stick and you're not actually wanted for your damage. People who maybe don't want to play elemental because they don't want to be out of mana all the time with absolutely nothing that they can do back. So what do? Well, you mix them together and you get a pretty good, still keeps up with the numbers, and in some regards surpasses, like Enhancement Shaman DPS by itself. So you have a high damage version of Shaman that lets you have the best of both worlds, and so what's really wrong with that? So what are the pros and cons of both builds? So the pros of playing with the melee build is, first and foremost, if you are playing with the melee build, there is a lot more consistency there with your auto attacks, and that goes without saying. But the thing is, you can't always get casts off in PvP because, truthfully, mages are going to shut you down most of the time. And as soon as you get counterspelled, you have absolutely zero castable spells that are not from the nature school of magic. So you're just down and out. You can fake cast and you can try to grounding totem it, but it's not always going to happen in a Warsong Gulch or an AV. This isn't a 1v1, easy duel, right? So, with that being said, those auto attacks are going to give you a lot more leeway. I do recommend you take 2 out of 2 in Ghost Wolf, and that also helps as well for sticking on your targets. But just having Wind Fury up and Lightning Shield, and then relying on just getting a shock up every 5 seconds, always picking the right one. There is a lot of skill in which one to pick for certain moments, and that just comes from learning how to play the game. Like playing the character, and you need to figure out what those moments are as you play. It's really difficult to explain, but right. So the pro is that you are more consistent with your auto attacks, and that's very good for PvP. The con is that, yes, you can use your spells more. Your spells are more potent. Shocks are more potent, but you have far less magic capability than if you were to gear as an Elemental Shaman and make melee your minor as opposed to your major. And again, these first 2 pro and cons really just go without saying, but because you lack that, you have less reach than the other build, and you are less dependable with your burst, because the other build is going to get very quick chain lightnings off. You can go lightning bolt, chain lightning, shock as well, and the lightning bolt could crit, and then you will global somebody instantaneously, and everyone's probably seen those memes. Elemental Shaman can 3-hit you, and it looks like 1 hit, and honestly, the melee build can't really do that. You'd have to get a Wind Fury proc off, and, you know, or maybe chain lightning, earth shock when they're not looking, since it's slower. You can do this in Warsong Gulch and AV, but if your opponent is paying attention to you, your spells are a lot less good, your castable spells are a lot less good, so you really have to prey on those Wind Fury procs, and that's the other con, is that it is much more RNG reliant. So the pros of the other build, the elemental focused build of the elemental flurry side, is that, again, you are much more consistent with your spells, and that's a very, very big deal. Your spells cast faster. That is a huge plus. Your burst is more reliable. That is a huge plus. The cons is that while you can and will be using your weapon as a miner, it is far less good in PvP than it is in PvE. Right, so in PvE, you can melee on your Elemental Devastation procs, but we didn't choose to go with that build for PvP because, quite honestly, that's almost never going to happen before you finally just die, right? Like, out of mana, or you can't keep fighting. Like, you're never going to make it towards needing to auto-attack for mana during Elemental Devastation procs. There is no arena in Classic WoW, so there's no overly long matches with dampening that might require you need that extra mana, so we choose Lightning Reach instead. Because of this, though, you're going to feel like you're just a gimped Elemental Shaman sometimes in PvP. Now, again, in PvE, this is probably the better of the two builds overall, right? But for PvP, again, you are a gimped Elemental Shaman, but if you get a Wind Fury proc, you will hit hard. Don't get me wrong, it's just your normal hits are not great, right? You have less melee crit typically as well, and so really everything is relying on burst. This is your glass cannon build. You want to one-shot your target, you want to blow them out of the water with a lightning bolt, chain lightning plus shock combo, and then you can run in there and you can auto-attack with Wind Fury and stuff, and it won't feel bad, you know, like if you just had a staff or a shield and an aura hammer, whatever they're called from MC, right? Or a dagger or something like that, or a stone hammer. So yeah, you're going to feel a lot better than those people do when they're out of mana or caught in a position in which casting isn't possible. But again, that's another pro, is that if you are in a position where casting isn't possible, you can still use melee, right? It's just less good, but that is a big pro of the build overall. Most casters cannot do that. So, you know, it's really choosing between a more, I would say, true to the build style, which is the one that uses melee gear and uses spells as a supplement to melee. And then there's the Glass Cannon Burst style, which has more consistency to it, but again, your hybrid capability, that reliability, that flexibility rather, does kind of go down with this build and makes you a little bit more one-dimensional. But again, it's a quick build. If there's a lot of, like, less mages in your BG so that less people can interrupt you, just overall, well, then you'll have a lot more fun with this build. But I think, you know, the biggest pro overall of this build is that you have more mana, just based on your gear. But again, yeah, that's what it's going to come down to. Do you want to be melee focused with spells as kind of like surprise burst, or do you want to be more longevity because going out of mana tends to not matter as much for you, or do you want to be a glass cannon? So I hope this made sense to you guys. I hope you enjoyed this quick guide. If you did, make sure to give it a like and subscribe. But I will see you guys in the next video. Mcdoubles out.